Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And when it comes to news, CCP has launched the limited time Stargate Trailblazer event, which, well, I think it's starting to really feel like a bit of an experiment to see how players interact with the resources, those resource sites that CCP uses for the event, and they're definitely asking for as much feedback as they can get. So I think that my theory sort of holds up, that they do have bigger plans, and they certainly had bigger plans as well, where some agency would exist for the players, and maybe it's still a part of revamping faction warfare and things like that. But we can't be sure, of course, but it really does feel like this is potentially just the beginning, and they're looking into how can we make this better, how can we make this fun and rewarding for the players. So, if you have participated in this, definitely give your feedback to CCP. It is highly sought after at the moment. The event is even extended by a couple of days, so you can definitely try and go take a look. On the co-incorporated front, we have been war-decked and the structure has been attacked. Shields are down, so it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. I'm not really planning to set up a massive defense or anything like that. I am, after all, a solo player, but that's exactly why I think it's so interesting, because this is now the experience of solo players try to set up a structure, and it is definitely looking like it's going to be a tough story for anyone to do at the moment. I guess that the structure cores are just enough of an incentive these days to go after what's even a completely empty structure. May also be because I've got a little bit of extra exposure, but I'll keep you guys up to date as always. Let's get started on the New Eden store here. I do know that you can get like a rattlesnake skin with I think a month Omega time at the moment, but I don't think that'll show up here in the New Eden store. We do have some new ultra violence vortex skins, saw them last week as well. I think they're definitely interesting, have a unique pattern to them that reacts differently with the different large ships that we're seeing over here, but we're seeing nothing when it comes to sales or anything like that. And on the services front, yeah, nothing special to report here. Alright, that means that we get to move on to the market, and as always we'll start with plex and stuff coming in at 240. There we go. So let's get started. Here is plex, and you may have seen it from the ticker. Maybe a little bit of a weird one, but yeah, 2.5 million for one seller and then 254 million for the next one in GTA itself. And you can see that 20-day moving average does want to go higher, but the average price still has a tough time getting over that 2.4 million. But now, for me, this does start to read like some upwards pressure, and this despite the fact that there's still like some sales going on with Omega time, for instance, at the moment. Not exactly in cost, but you get a little bit of an extra skin that should put a little bit of downward pressure on that. And despite this, we are seeing the price trying to get back up there. So if we go to the player owned trade hubs as well, we're still just below 2.5 million for the sellers, and the buyers are just below 2.4 million. But I think that this gap is slowly increasing. Yeah, the pressure is on the upside right here. Once CCP stops with the interventions, which could still last a little bit. I mean, we are around the anniversary, there's Galente events coming and things like that. So there's definitely, I feel, a lot of marketing going out at the moment, which is not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. The focus is on newer players, attracting players to the game, to try it out and hopefully to keep them. But all of that could increase demand, and so yeah, plex investment, who knows? It's definitely an interesting time. There's still some deflationary pressures out there as well, especially summertime that's coming. I mean, we've had a terrible spring here in Belgium, which, and in most of Europe, I'm going to say. So I do think that that'll maybe have a little bit of an influence on players still being super active, but summertime does tend to put some pressure on all of that. So it's still a difficult balancing act, but my read for plex at the moment, at least in the last couple of weeks, is it's trying to get back above that 2.4 million on the average price. Sellers are really going up there. towards the 2.5 million. So I would not be surprised that we can manage that on a couple of days we have, and that then we could be in for a turnaround, which historically speaking it does happen, not every single year, but yeah, this April-May period, which is usually a FanFest period, an EVE anniversary period, does quite often coincide with a bottoming out in the plex price, or it's like an inflection point. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. So you know, I'm not telling anyone that we are definitely going up in price or anything like that, but you know, a direction right now it feels like it could be going up. Then we get the multiple pilot train certificates. You can see here as well that 20-day moving average does slowly want to pull up as well. We touched 1.25 billion probably around a week ago. A little bit of a pullback from that, but as long as this bottom doesn't break back down to less than 1.2 billion, I'm going to say that this sort of confirms that there's some upwards pressure in the prices at the moment. 1.227 billion ISK for the trading certificate for the sellers. Buyers coming in at almost 1.2 billion as well. So that's not a lot of margin, right around the 1.2 mark, but the trend here, to me, this does feel like a slight upwards trend. Then we have the skill extractors next, that of course follow plex quite closely, and they've made it above 280 million and went to almost 290 about 10 days ago. A little bit of pressure again, but at the tail end, and you can see that on a 20-day moving average, we still see we want to go back up. Sellers are at 278 million in the Tranquility Trading Tower, buyers at 275 though, so super narrow margin on this one, and that's really the question. I mean, this is last 24 hours. We have gone down from 280 basically to 278.5 pretty much. So that's a little bit of pressure from supply. Volume wise, it's quite a decent amount, so there may be players that have that are either losing patience or that have managed to buy at the bottom, that are already looking at cashing out at the moment. But you know, if we would consider this to be a little bit of an anomaly, right, that you see this much of supply all of a sudden in the last 24 hours, then we could see a continuation of that upwards price. I mean, there's no certainty in this whatsoever, but that's still my read on that. That 20-day moving average is definitely, to me, a strong indication. What's the impact on the skill injectors? Let's take a look at that. And yeah, this is the opposite. Large skill injectors still going down. 1 year low point, well below 600 million on the average price at the moment. We're talking 595 million for the sellers and then 565 million for the buyers. And this is exactly what I was talking about a little bit, is that once one of these barriers, you could say, right, we see here we bounced off of 600 and we hesitated a little bit at the 600 million mark. But once you break through that, you do tend to get an acceleration in especially when it's going down. That's always very careful. It's don't catch that falling knife. And in fact here it's like textbook. At 630 you had it once and twice again as well. So where the market is at, do we really want to go below 630 million? Oh, nope, strong hesitation, a little bit of demand shows back up, and then we try to you know, but then the pressure comes back. And we do so a second time, but once you break through that, yeah, we just don't see any recoveries, and we go down to that 600 million mark. A little bit of hesitation, maybe at a 620 or something like that, but here at 600 million, definitely, you know, a strong resistance with a nice little pullback. But then now again, that was a falling knife, that was a falling knife, this is a falling knife, and here at the end, was the actual low point going to be? Very difficult to say. And I would say that here, of course, it is how generous CCP still is, and we know that this does happen, of course, around an important date like an anniversary for EVE Online. So with skill points, you know, demand for large skill injectors and skill injectors in general ought to be under pressure from all of this. But yeah, this is a serious pullback, and you can see how the gap opens up, right? Sellers before all of this must have been well above the 600 million mark, or at least a decent chunk above, but once they've gone down 595, that gap just opens up. Buyers go down to 565, and the opposite could happen in plex as well, of course, right? If we manage to make our way above 2.4 million, buyers feel forced to go there, which gives room for the sellers to go up even higher. So we will see. This is still definitely like on a knife's edge because these skill injectors, which is what I kind of wanted to get back to, are clearly still showing signs of very strong pressure despite what's happening with plex. And so this is opening that gap of, well, it should be the skill point part of injectors that's really not seeing demand, and that's pushing this price back down. But it could also be a very nice investment if plex do start to go back up in price, and then CCP stops with being as generous as they are at the moment with skill points, which I think could happen. And then you've got that whole summer vibe that actually could cloud everything. So it's difficult, but I would say this is starting to look kind of interesting for investors. Then we've got these small scale injectors that are following suit as well, but are showing signs of a little bit of hesitation in the last couple of days. So here we're talking very close to the 120 million mark, 122 for the sellers, and yeah, 113 for the buyers. So the pressure is still on here. Last 24 hours, another 77 here. It's gonna keep that pressure and that stability basically, but first sign of a little bit of hesitation. Do we really want to keep going down on this one when the average prices are very close to the sellers at this point? So it's interesting. Daily alpha injectors also seeing a little bit of pressure. Again, not a big surprise. If plex manage to stabilize and go back up a little bit, and then your skill injectors go down, that's really a sign that skill points are not exactly in super high demand in the player base at the moment, and this will eventually translate to alpha players as well. While they have their unique goal, of course, right? Try to earn 40-50 million, get a daily alpha injector. That's definitely something that I think is a nice rotation for a lot of players. Eventually, you get a lot of free skill points, and so the first seller is now also coming in below 40 million, super close to 40 for most of them, and almost 36 million for the buyers. This is probably just that lack of demand showing up through the market. We still have the hypercores left after that are, well, actually hesitating, right? If you're looking for a sign of inflation taking root perhaps, or inflation expectations taking root here, 20-day moving average for the hypercores basically flat for the month, 5-day moving average, nice wavy pattern above and below that. Here the hypercores is telling us maybe a slight edge upwards, but really it's telling us we could still fall either side. 258 million for the sellers in JITA, 252 in the trade hubs, and then 244, very narrow margin here again between sellers and buyers for the hypercores. So yeah, it's really not science, or I can't guarantee anything. I can only give you guys my feeling here. It does feel like plex wants to go back up here a little bit, but the injectors are showing the exact opposite sign. They still go back down. So it's difficult. It's difficult. Risky investors may want to look at all of this though. Next up, we've got the mineral market at 13 minutes. There we go. Let's start with titanium. You may have seen that from the ticker, but a bottom is starting to form. I do think that we may have overshot a little bit by just breaking straight through the 5 ISK here, and then we settled at probably around 4.5 for the average prices. In the meantime, in JITA itself, sellers are going up towards 5 ISK again at 493, buyers are at 457. We do expect, at least I expect, that new average price point to be lower than before, and I would put it at 6 ISK before, right? 7 ISK definitely sell, above 6 ISK, you can sell, but you can hesitate as well. Below 6 ISK, I would definitely not sell and hold on, which is kind of reflected in this chart as well. Right here, right, a decent volume, so we're selling, but we're going closer and closer to that 6. Once you go below that, the market really doesn't have that much room to go lower. In fact, we went back up on the April rush, but of course we are in a new dynamic since the industry changes, where in general there is less need for titanium. So for now, my read on this is, I would say below 5 ISK I would hold on, but once we get above 5, and I do think that we can get there, we start to get back into the, maybe you could sell half your trade or something like that if you need the ISK. That's my current read, my current expectation, and basically this period below 5 ISK here is not an unexpected lull, an unexpected further decline, overshoot of the decline, you could say, because of course this here is a massive bubble in industry which will have its short-term impact on demand. So here that's my read on that. I do think above 5 is possible, and that we're already starting to set that in motion here. Now we've got pyrite, which really hadn't lost that much, but is sort of, buckling under pressure today. Is it able to hold on to 20 ISK? Sellers are coming in at 19.95, so it is not, this is dangerous, of course, right? The first 4 sellers deciding we're just going to get rid of our pyrite below 20, and then the buyers are coming in system. Let's see if I can find the green ones then. What the hell? 1453 for GTAF44 itself. So here, clearly some pressure building with a little bit of a lack of demand, basically. That's going back down towards 15. That's a pretty wide gap, and so the sellers are buckling. Unfortunately, looks like 20 won't be defended by pyrite. Then we've got Mexalon, where I feel like it's overshooting a little bit as well, although historically speaking, we're still okay. We're still hitting 75 on the chart at the moment, and we're talking, man, look at how quickly this goes though. 75, and then we go up to 77 decently quickly. For the sellers, buyers coming in at 71.10, and let's see if this is a little bit 71.30, in fact, in the Tranquility Trading Tower. Here again, this is a 1-year low point. Historically speaking, 75 ISK is actually a normal Mexalon price in my experience, but this also feels like we may be overshooting a little bit, right? If industry picks up a little bit more in nullsec, right, once everyone gets used to all of the new goods that are needed, they get some supply lines up and running, I think that can happen. Then I do think that a recovery for Mexalon, not to 125, 50, once 200, that's definitely not in the books, of course, but a recovery, at least holding on to 75 and perhaps getting back to something between 75 and 100, I think it is possible, but it does depend on extra demand, and so then you have to follow my thinking that at the moment, because of all of this right here, which has been put into a lot of industry, right now we're looking at lower demand than what we can expect in the longer term future. Then we've got Isogen that is making its bounce back to 50 and then coming back down. So we are still talking 48.37 for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers. I think it's still that same story, right? We went to 50. Why? Because we have a 61 million and a 50 million sell orders at 50.8 and at 51 million ISK. And then here we now have another 22 million that's being sold at 48.37. Obviously, right now, again, I think there is that lower demand, and so there's going to be a little bit of pressure for whoever is still holding all of these Isogen stocks to dump them at the prices, but they're probably going about it in a slightly smarter way than setting 2 billion units of Isogen on the market here. And so sometimes we do then get that little bit of breathing room, and we see that market make it back and touch those big volumes, slowly nibble at them as well. We need a little bit more time, but we are slowly chewing through them. I think we can tell that from the price here touching 50 ISK, right? Not obviously, it's not able to go to 55, 60 or anything like that with 100 million units sitting and waiting here. But it's constantly hitting that because the new supplies aren't really able to keep the price below this massive volume. And so now, of course, a little bit of extra dumping happening here at 48 is going to keep us stable at the current price range. But eventually, I think the market will make its way through all of that, especially, and unfortunately, here we do see that lack of demand that's happening at the moment. But I think it'll pick back up and we'll slowly make our way through all of that. So it's interesting. Perhaps whoever is holding all of that Isogen is watching Eve Talk, because I feel like this is a much smarter way to go about this, right? Even if you still have billions of units of Isogen, overall it's a little bit more work, of course, but you're not spooking the market. You're not completely freezing the market up at a certain price point. No, you get opportunities to sell some a little bit lower, but also, all right, 51. and eventually we'll chew our way through this, and then maybe you can try down here at higher prices where there's, for instance, another 400 million units ready at 54. Spread that out, don't spook the market that much with those huge volumes, don't choke it up with incredible amounts of Isogen, and then overall you get, I think, a better opportunity later down the line, because I would say supply demand for Isogen, if you just look at what's being produced and used on a daily basis, it's probably not gonna look at like a 50 ISK price range. Next up, we've got the Noxium market that is stabilizing nicely above 1500 ISK, and for me that's the strongest indication that Isogen definitely has that potential, because sellers are coming in at mostly almost 1600 ISK, buyers at almost 1500 ISK. This is like the highest stable price point, you could say, for Noxium that I have ever seen, and that is because it is the low sec problem. This stuff has to come from low sec. As you can see, what are the mine supplies? 1.5 million. Everything else on the front page is way less than 1 million units, except once we start to get 1600 in price, then a couple million units find their way to the market here and there. Eventually, I would say Isogen is going to find itself in that same problem, because you don't just mine 60 million units of Isogen under the current circumstances. It just has more to go, because it's been the hardest hit mineral in the resource bonanza period, which is like 2 years ago at this point, but it was just so massive for a long amount of time that just, getting all of that extra Isogen was just part of regular mining, that we'll just need that much more time to chew through all of it. Then we've got the Zydrine market that's also finally coming back up a little bit, kind of, to me, confirming the theory that, yeah, we're overshooting a little bit because of a lack of demand that existed right after the April bonanza, industry bonanza, and so now we're back at 930 for the sellers and almost 900 ISK for the buyers, still below Noxium, so really that low sec bottleneck is a real thing, and Isogen should be able to profit from that. And then we get Megasite that's back above 600 ISK, which I think it's the same thing, right? Early May here, you get a little bit of a dip, but that is just because, well, everyone is like, we can't use the old BPCs anymore, and industry kind of chokes up all of a sudden, doesn't need that much in minerals, and we get that little bit of a lull in the price. 623 for the sellers and 570 for the buyers. This happens to also be the period where I was like, all right, I am going to put up these buy orders, and then I'm going to look through my BPCs and look for those that still have margin, right? And I would say that that's been a good choice then. It's slowly going to become less and less viable, because prices are recovering, general demand is recovering, but that was good timing on my part. I do think that I've produced some very cheap stuff and managed to buy some very cheap minerals thanks to doing that. And then finally, we've got the Morphite market that is picking back up as well. May have basically struggled with that same thing a little bit of lack of industry, just in general, right here in early May, where we bottomed out at 62,500 on the average price, and we're back at 84,500 for the sellers and almost 81,000 for the buyers. Now, my read on this is this does feel like a very big, very, very high price, that even historically, I would say it's almost like 8 times the normal price that we've seen for Morphite. So there is definitely like way more need for Morphite than production out there. I'm not sure if CCP is going to eternally keep it that way. And yeah, let's keep in mind, we're talking resource sites for the event. If it's like those special resources specifically for these gates only, who knows what kind of resources they may introduce as becoming a part of that event. If they would just put in trace amounts of Morphite, for instance, in those expedition sites, that could sort of solve this problem. It's still a risky business if you keep it to like low sec, maybe put it as part of faction warfare, but it is a resource gathering event, right? It is a site where you've got mining ships, and so that could be an opportunity for CCP if they want to do something about the morphite price, to do something about the morphite price. So not saying it's gonna happen, I'm just saying this feels like a ridiculously high price. I would personally not want to be invested in morphite at the current price range. You know, producing it and selling it, yeah, that's very juicy, of course, but as an investment, I'd be careful as to what CCP may decide to do. Next up, we've got the PI market coming in at 24.25. Here, I mean, this is a little bit of more ISK flowing into plex, minerals stabilizing, so I'm not sure if this is going to be good news. So here for the broadcast nodes, for instance, we do have a little bit of a pullback down to 1.5 million ISK on the chart, a little bit above that for the sellers, almost 1.6 for most, and then buyers below 1.4 million. This to me feels like, yeah, demand is going to start to stop once everything stabilizes a little bit, as I've said, for the new industry changes, right? It's just a little bit of extra PI setups for big nullsec entities. It takes a bit of time, but it's definitely doable. You are going to, in all likeliness, see us return to a more normal situation, which unfortunately for PI means not enough demand for the supplies, and so this is the first sign of pressure there. Construction blocks managed to make their way back above 8,000 ISK, but it's still in that low band. Historically, I'd say above 10k is a more normal average. We're talking 8,000 for the sellers, 7.5 for the buyers. A little bit of extra demand apparently pushing the buyers up a little bit. Overall though, still trading well below average. Then we get consumer electronics, still going lower, a little bit of pressure despite being at 7,500 ISK, and my historical perspective there is almost 12.5 for consumer electronics, 7,200 for the sellers, yeah, and this is clearly a lack of demand, despite the fact that the gap is closed. It's just, you know, look at the volumes. I think that tells the whole story. Then we've got the coolants market that managed to make its way back above 8,000 ISK, which is still well below average, and yeah, a little bit of extra fuels needed for the industry processes. That does mean a little bit of extra demand. 8,400 for the sellers, 8,000 ISK for the buyers. I in fact have sold a little bit of my coolants reserves as well, trying to take advantage of this, and I think it's the right choice because it's, in my opinion, the same story. This won't last for very long. I do think that this is all also incalculated, and that big enough entities will be able to set up very easily some extra coolant productions in order to satisfy their own extra demand for the new industry, and as a result I think that supply is going to overtake demand in general. Then we got the cryoprotectant solutions also showing signs of more pressure, now well below 100,000 ISK on the chart, 100,500 for the sellers, 94,000 for the buyers. So if you want to buy cryoprotectant solutions below 100k, you can definitely try to put up a buy order for that. Enriched uranium is slowly making its way back to 10,000 ISK, so that looks like it's pretty good on this 1 year chart, but yeah, keep in mind enriched uranium is way harder to make than coolants. Normal historical price for coolants is that 10,000 ISK. For this one it's above 12.5, right? This peak here is actually the normal average price, so we're still below average. 9,700 for the sellers, 9,000 for the buyers. Same story here in my opinion. I do think that there's enough organization out there that making some extra enriched uranium is going to be just the case, and that this is going to go back down to maybe 7.5 or something like that. That I mean, this is gambling on my part, right? This is definitely speculation, but I do think that the oversupply situation is here to come back. Integrity response drones, a little bit of a weird data point, making the chart a little bit harder to read, but below 1.8 million for the sellers, 1.7 for the buyers. I'd say that this one is still doing quite okay, managed to maintain its price. Mechanical parts went to 8k, and then the pressure starts to build. 8,100 for the sellers, 7.4 for the buyers. I would not be surprised that, yeah, supplies, look at that here, definitely top heavy in the volumes, which means that we make it to 8k, we make it above 8k. Well, there's plenty of people like myself that produce that easy to make PI material, like mechanical parts, like coolants, that are going to keep all of this in check very, very easily. Then we've got the nanites market back above 5k on a little bit of a volume increase, 5.6 for the sellers, 5.3 almost for the buyers. I think here we can clearly see a little bit of extra demand, maybe like a Nalsic event or something like that. If I'm not mistaken, nanites are also needed, yeah, in nanite repair paste, maybe even the event that's happening right now, right? Low sec, there's definitely been some pirate activity there as well, some extra PvP, and you know, it's part of smaller scale PvP, I think, to definitely have some nanite repair paste as well. So maybe a little bit of a nice bump for nanites because of that. Nano factories also showing first signs of pressure, down to the 750,000 on the chart, 785 for the seller, 750, and then 744 for the buyers. Yeah, again, look at the supply, how much we can browse. And this is just in Jita, by the way, so there's gonna be maybe a little bit of extra supply in Tranquility Trading Tower. And then look at the demand, that is just way less than that. Again, once it stabilizes in nullsec, once the industry changes have been absorbed by the player base, you could say, expect that pressure to mount. Organic mortar applicators, you know, 780 for the seller, 650 for the buyers. Again, this is the demand, this is the supply. It's starting to come back. Recursive computing modules, they never really broke out, and another annoying data point, but we are talking less than 1.4 million by quite a bit, and 1.2 million for the buyers. Then our robotics, yeah, they're just not doing well at all. Specialized PI for fuels, 62,000 for the sellers, 58,000 for the buyers. This is 40% below its normal price, which it historically normal price, I'm going to say, which it really hasn't just reached all year. 100k and above is where we normally would expect robotics to be, you know, if you've been playing for a while. Self-harmonizing power cores, same story, just went straight through that 175 million. So sellers going down towards 1.7 million, buyers are at 1.6, 1.5 very quickly, 1.55 very quickly, 1.5 very quickly. Yeah, it's just going to get absorbed, right? There's not enough demand to stop all of the supply that is available. Sterile conduits holding on quite nice, 125 million for the sellers and 114 for the buyers. So honestly, I think I've got a couple of sterile conduits. If you happen to have some of those older advanced PI material investments, I would try to sell if you're looking at a profit right now. Yukomi superconductors next. Yeah, not really managing to get back above 75k, and then the pressure is back. 73,000 for the sellers and 68,000 for the buyers. Again, these are the buyers, and then these are the sellers. And then finally, we've got the wetware mainframe that maybe crashed down a little bit too quickly to 1.25 million. That was definitely a sharp pullback where some investment action is pulling us back up. 1.5 for the sellers, 1.4 for the buyers. So that was a little bit too precipitous, perhaps a little bit of, you know, too aggressive dumping of the wetware mainframes, but we're stabilizing again at a loss from the recovery that we've known with the industry changes. So that's the state of PI. Unfortunately, yeah, for the medium term, I would say it's not looking that great. Advanced moon materials next, coming in at 32.40. As always, we'll start with the carbide-like materials. Here is a crystalline carbonate, and it is stabilizing at a one-year low point of 225 ISK. 225 for the sellers, 209 for the buyers. Very interesting second top right here, but with a little bit of staying power apparently for crystalline carbonate. Next up for Caldari, which is down here, titanium carbide. Look at that volatility, double top went up to 350, and right now the chart is stabilizing at 300 ISK, double the price of a year ago. 284 for the sellers, 250 for the buyers. So that market here is really trying to find its range, and it's looking like it's becoming very expensive. Then we've got for the Minmatar, not metamaterials, but Ferrite carbide, that's just seeing a massive breakout, 1-year high point, and apparently at the start of the week it went up to 300 ISK. Sellers have gone down to 262, buyers are at 250, but this is again a massive premium. And while Ferrite carbide had been able to stay away from the volatility that we have seen in Caldari, especially also a little bit in Galente, right now it just, it broke down, and we are up with a massive swing in the 250 to 300 range. So this is a very big breakout, but this is also sort of a catch-up move, you could say, for Ferrite carbide. Could be very interesting if you happen to have bought some Minmatar stealth bombers below 25 million. So we will see. Next up we have the Amar one, which is tungsten carbide. That is not doing the same thing. The upward pressure is there though, so it is getting well above 200 ISK, 230 for the sellers and almost 200 ISK for the buyers. But this one still clearly the one that was the most stable. It did know that double top towards 300, but it basically weathered that storm decently well, in my opinion. But the margin is opening up here again, upwards pressure for all of the carbides, and we're talking very close to 3 1-year high points. Then we've got the meta materials. If those start to move up, then that could become a perfect storm for Tech 2 to go up in price as well, but that's just not happening. Here is photonic metamaterials basically stabilizing at around 12.5 thousand, 12,900 for the sellers, 12.4 for the buyers. Honestly, this on this one chart even looks like it's a little bit below average. It's just not being impacted that much. For Caldari there was some volatility, so here we saw a spike up to 35,000 ISK, and we're still paying 25,000 ISK for this one. On the chart, 23.5 for the sellers, 21.7 for the buyers. So this is still very expensive compared to its Galente counterpart, which also means that there may be some instability that will need to solve itself eventually. I do think that will happen, and at the moment this is probably part of the reason why Caldari has been so much more volatile than most of the other Tech 2 ship categories, because we had this massive premium compared to all of the others on the non-linear metamaterials, which means that in my opinion margins were much more sought after in Caldari, with a lot more stability in its counterpart. I would say Amar being the exact opposite. So this is non-linear metamaterials. Again, nothing crazy, definitely a little bit of upward pressure, but way more expensive than the Galente one. Then we've got the Minmatar, which is plasmonic metamaterials, and here you can see also a little bit of upward pressure. That's interesting. The second one as well, going above 20,000 ISK now for the Minmatar one, 23,000 for the sellers, 22,000 for the buyers. This really starts to put this one into perspective. Maybe if you expect the normalization to be Galente going up to the 20k range, who knows. And then we've got terahertz metamaterials for Amar. That is also going up to 20,000 ISK. That's interesting. 21,000 for the sellers, 19,000 for the buyers. Photonic metamaterials, put up a buy order. It could be very, very interesting, because all the others have now made their way above 20,000 ISK, and if they don't pull back, then this ought to look like a very good deal to a lot of not just speculators, but even producers. So that's kind of a weird one. We still have the other advanced materials, excuse me. So here fermionic condensates, again climbing out of the 60,000 bottom that it in fact on a couple of days broke quite easily. So this is, just could be a dead cat bounce in my opinion, not necessarily a sign of good news. 67,000 for the sellers, 65 for the buyers, still well below average. Ferrogel also trying to make its way back above 35,000 ISK, which it does for the sellers, 36, but buyers are still at 34, and this is still definitely decently low. We're not seeing these high peaks just yet, so I would say pressure is here as well. Fullerite tried to get back above 1,000 ISK and it's just not succeeding. Supply coming in. It's just, the story that I think I told last week, where any higher prices in the other advanced moon materials get squashed very quickly by supplies. And in fact, now they're keeping a closer eye on things, so these tops are getting lower and lower, and as a result I think the pressure is just going to start to build again with oversupply, and we could be back for another downward cycle. Hypersynaptic fibers just had that peak, went up to 13,000 ISK, 1 year high point. Looks really good, right? But look at how quickly, in a matter of days, this pulls back down to 10,000 ISK, and we're talking sellers at 10,270, buyers at 10,250. But we don't need that much, I think, to keep the pressure back on this. Although 10,000 seems like it wants to be defended by a lot of the markets. But yeah, we will see here. I think it does show that the supply response to price spikes is very, very strong, very quick on these advanced moon mats. Nano transistors, again, a couple of spikes here above 5K, trying to do the same thing, but just not succeeding. Supply is already coming online below 5,000 ISK. Phenolic composites doing a little bit better on this 1 year chart. Still below 2000 ISK though, by quite a little bit. And then we've got the ceramic fibers. That was our exception. So this one has that premium, went up to 500 ISK and is able to move its way around that at the moment. 525 for the sellers, 480 for the buyers. And if I'm not mistaken, that was just part of the new industry changes. You need more of this stuff in general, so we've got this premium that it's able to maintain. But all of the others, in my opinion, are struggling with too much supply, and sometimes we dry up a little bit. Prices do spike, but it's just getting whacked very, very quickly. Then we've got the Tech 2 ship market that's coming in at 40.30. There we go. Let's see what we can spot. I'm also going to show you guys this. So I tried, I don't think I managed to pull it off just yet, to grab a basilisk at 200 million, including taxes. And so I've got the hounds and I've got the Svepel. But let's start then with that basilisk. That, all right, is still moving back down. I'm not sure which one my, oh no, okay, I'm going to say that I have my basilisk at less than 200 million. If I look at these buy orders, I don't recognize my own one. 214 for the sellers, 189.6 for the buyers. And you can see here the pressure with the average prices reaching the 200 million mark. This feels to me like a very nice pullback. We just saw the carbides move back up for almost all of them. So this ought to be, I think, a chance for you to even undercut me. I feel that sure that I'm gonna move this one to the holdings actually, because my buy order is not here anymore, so I must have got it. So yeah, you can also try to buy as close to 190 as possible, but again, you're gonna have to be very fast for that, because I do think we'll start to see a bounce off of the 200 million mark on the chart. Just makes too much sense, in my opinion, that you know, investors and things like that will look at that 200 million as a bit of an interesting spot. And then you'll be too late, basically, for the buy orders, because then no one is going to dump at these prices anymore. So right now, very sharp pullback, and yeah, I made a move on that, and I got a basilisk for less than 200 million. I can already try and sell it at 214. I think it's like close to a zero, but maybe if I sell from if I manage, no, actually that doesn't matter, yeah. So maybe a slight profit already, but yeah, if we spike up again to the 250 or above range, we're looking at some nice cash. Next up, we've got the Cerberus that's also seeing pressures, and it's now hitting 250 million ISK, 262 for the sellers and 225 for the buyers. Let's see if we can get something close to that. That's down here. It's starting to look interesting. You can probably grab a Cerberus for less than 230, but you also see that the yearly lows go down to 200 million ISK, and that's the real question, of course. What's that? I've said that in several EVE talks before. What's going to become that new bottom price where, all right, if you buy here, you're pretty certain that you're gonna make ISK? Well, in the Cerberus, it was very easy for most of the year and the period before that. Less than 200 million. Try to jump in. If you grab it, you're looking at ISK. If not, then you know, it's just been someone else that's been more faster. But you can see here that the last one was actually at the 230 range. maybe even close to the 225 range. In fact, no, actually 210 then on this one. So that's still the discovery at the moment, and so I'm gambling on 200 million for the Basilisk, but I'm not sure if that's exactly the right spot and what the spot's going to be for the Cerberus. Difficult to say, but our first couple of pullbacks, which should create buy opportunities. Then we've got the Guardian that's also pulling back down, and we're talking 205 million for the sellers, 185 for the first buyer, then 180, then 177. Yeah, if this goes to less than 180, I'm definitely gonna try to jump in on that as well. But very, very strong and sharp pullbacks for these three cruiser class hulls. That's very interesting, of course, and potentially creating buy opportunities. The question for me, what's going to be the most interesting, is what's those bottoms, right? Where does this market bottom out? Then we've got the Hound that is trying to edge its way back up above 30 million. ISK sellers are at 33 million, buyers are at 26 million. So you can see here already a million higher than my investment. And yeah, we've seen that just in the advanced movements, right? Upwards pressure on all these Minmatar production prices. So when do I plan to sell? I don't know. 33 million is definitely already at the high end of this chart. This would be like sort of a small sell opportunity, but I may just keep that a little bit as a longer term investment for now. I may like double down or something like that for the Hound on another buy opportunity. We'll see. I could definitely sell at a profit already. Then we get the Ichthyorsa, that's climbing back up, 920 million for the sellers, 800 for the buyers, 1 year high point basically. Triclavian stuff still very, very expensive. The Ishtar, after its double top, is finally moving back down as well. So we've got 240 million for the sellers, 226 for the buyers, and so what we're seeing here is mostly double tops. I don't really know how to read that one, but from real world, it's not like I'm an expert or anything like that, but I have been watching like the Bitcoin stuff, and so there we had this what's called a head and shoulders pattern or something like that. So if we would have had like a peak up here as well, then we would have had like a head and shoulders pattern, and that was like a strong technical indication that this would come back into play. So that's not the case here. Not really sure how we would read a double top. Let's try and combine the crazy stuff that I'm seeing happening in like the crypto markets, which I'm not in, by the way. If anyone thinks I'm like gonna be shilling or anything like that for crypto, I really don't like to gamble, and so I'm definitely not in the crypto market. But this here is like, I would say, a pretty standard double top, and what comes after that, technically, I don't really know, but I did learn about the head and shoulders pattern, so I'm gonna try and look for that in Eve Talk as well, I think. Then we get the Minmatar. That could almost be a head and shoulders pattern right here as we speak about it, right? We get this peak here that goes to that 40 million range, and the other two here, the shoulders at 35 million, which means that a 25 million may come back into play, and we're not there yet. 31.4 for the sellers, 27 million for the buyers, but look at that, we don't need that many buy orders to go down and get back to the situation we were in mid-April. So maybe I'll like look for that. Let's see if that materializes or not in the Manticore market. So I would say if I'd want to invest in the Manticore, I'd be looking for the chart to touch 25 million, and thus for us to be able to buy below 25 million ISK. Then we've got the Munin that's continuing its upwards trajectory. So I think that's called like a bull market or something like that. And it touched 300 million though, 1 year high point, and we're clearly seeing some pressure on this as well. It's already down to 265 million for the sellers, to 45 million for the buyers. So that's a little bit of pressure here. And then you get to have that same worry, right? If we see another bounce after this. So let's see, where are we buying? 245. You're buying below 250. Here you can see we had the top, let's say 270, maybe even 280. So you could try to like buy a Munin below 250, try and sell it here at 280, but then you get another one of those head and shoulder patterns that are forming. So I'm not really sure. This is very interesting, right? Seeing how markets try to function, trying to learn that stuff. Definitely part of what I enjoy in EVE Online. But this one does feel like it's a close to 1 year high point if we disregard this war spike right here. And then we'll have to see if the trend can continue or not, which will depend on where we go from here, especially with these buyers. Then we get the Nemesis that went up to 30 million ISK, managed to make its way back down to 25, and now a small bounce. I would not say that this is a time where I want to move in. 27 million for the sellers and 23 million for the buyers. Then we've got the Oneros, that's also from yet another high point, and it's still climbing, so this would probably still be considered like a bull market at the moment. Oneros at 220 million, buyers at 211. Yeah, very expensive, right? Everything well above the 200 million range. If we're trading here, that's super expensive. If you happen to be able to make them or something like that, I think you're looking at a good profit. The Panther stabilizing above 1.25 billion. So you have the production cost premium, right? Considering the full 1 year chart that's there, but it's not breaking out or anything like that. Almost 1.4 billion for the sellers and well above 1.2 for the buyers. It is expensive to make Tick 2 stuff. Well, Morphite's kind of showing us that. Purifier continuing its run up as well to 35 million ISK, 34.5 for the sellers, 29 million for the buyers. These are still below 30 million, so I'm reading that as a little bit of hesitation here, right? Any substantial supply could very quickly put us back down, and so then here again, you potentially have that head and shoulders pattern that could be forming. Then we get the Scimitar, very stable at the current price range. Volatility is starting to leave this one, I think, 240 million for the sellers, 212 for the buyers. That's still well above 200 million, so I would not want to invest in that. The Widow showing some late volatility as well, but again, everything shooting up from the 1.25 billion mark. I'm not looking at these battleships to speculate on, but more as a general trend gauge. And yeah, almost 1.6 billion for the sellers, well above 1.3 for the buyers, showing very expensive costs. And then we've got the Zealot that's climbing up to the 250 million mark, and that's really painful for me. Because I once had, I think, a below 200 million, 185 or something like that even, investment in the Zealot, and I think I gave up in this period. But now Zealots are selling for almost 245 million ISK. Buyers coming in at 215, very nice recovery. This also shows that patience is super important here. It doesn't always move like this, or like this, super spiky, full of opportunity. Sometimes patience is also what you need, and then now you would be in a good spot to sell a cheap Zealot. All right, let's move on to the Tech 3 ship market, 5140. There we go. As always, we start with the destroyers, and so I have a Zwepel that I bought again, including taxes, for less than 40 or for just around 41 million. I think it was just below that. Let's see what's happening. So unfortunately, not what I expected. The Confessor is pulling back down away from 50 million ISK, which shows that we should have plenty of supplies. 47 million for the sellers, 41 million for the buyers. Not that many buyers on the market, and we are talking 35, 13, 18, 11. Last 24 hours, 4 sell orders, but more than 20 ships. So this is a robust supply for the price here. I would say this does look like we could settle back down closer and at a lower price point here. Especially if everything else is doing the same thing. Then we've got the Hecate, which is diving back down below 50 million ISK, 48 for the sellers, 43 for the buyers. And here we're seeing again a little bit less in the last 24 hours, but you still have quite robust supply over the last week. So I'm gonna say that this one could also go to like the 47 million or something like that. And then we get the Jackdaw that is also showing that sign of. I was really surprised because to me it started to feel like we could be hitting that 50 million average for most of these, but it looks like demand is dropping off a little bit, or here, yeah, nothing too crazy in the supplies, 27.11, but everything else is quite in line, and yet sellers go down to less than 48 million, buyers are at 44 million. So if we're looking for a spike up in this Vapel, this is probably not gonna be the time that this will happen. We've got a slight edge up towards 45 million isk, we're talking almost 46 for the sellers, and still 41 million, which is in line with what I bought for the buyers. But yeah, my read now, right, last week and a week before that, you could see we spiked up to 60, we spiked up to 50. In the Confessor, in the Hecate, we made our way well above 50. And even the Jackdaw, right, played with 50 million for quite a bit and managed to make its way back very quickly here after reaching 45 million. So my read on this was, all right, looks like we've got really strong demand, and that like 50 million normal prices is coming into play. And then this Vapel was just low at 45 million. So it felt like this was the right time to move in, but maybe that I was wrong on that. We'll have to see, of course, in the upcoming weeks. If like the war requires a massive Jackdaw fleet or something like that, I could still come out on top. But at the moment, right, if we just consider things to keep going as they're going, it actually looks like this Vapel was predicting what the others would do, where we're basically in a very stable period, and demand may actually be dropping off just a little bit. Well, I'll keep you guys up to date, of course, as always. Then we've got the cruiser market. Here is the Legion basically stabilizing above 180, 187 for the sellers and 168 for the buyers. I would not move in on this one. Then we've got the Loki that's finally pulling back, but probably going to stabilize at the 180s. Well, no, 177 for the sellers, 165 for the buyers. This is a pretty sharp pullback that if you feel like gambling, I would say, you could try to grab one. We are talking well below 170 at 165-ish million for the buyers. That's decently below everything else before like the last 6 months of the chart. So that could be an interesting jumping point. Then we've got the Proteus that's going back up. Surprise move, 213 million for the Proteus. I think generally considered to be the least good tactical advanced cruiser. A strategic cruiser is currently apparently the most expensive one, probably on a lack of supply. Could be pure manipulation. Let's keep that in mind. And in fact, I would say that it is. I don't think that there's only a dozen or even less than 10 on this one. Protei that exist out there. I think someone basically bought a lot of them and is currently trying to push that price. And then we get the Tengu that's also going back down to a 180 million range. Yeah, 180 for the sellers, 166 for the buyers. Is this a buy opportunity? 166, yeah, maybe, right? If you can buy below 170, that's not that bad. But this does feel a lot more like gambling. It's quite noticeable though, right? 166, that's below the last 6 months. And then for the low-key buyers, we're well below the last 6 months as well. Is this the start of the crash? I don't know. The strategic cruiser market, I think, is basically small enough that it can be easily manipulated. And that leaves us the extra product for the week, and we are at 56.30 for ice products this week. So last week we did gas, and this week we go for ice materials, ice products. Kind of want to have a feel of that. I felt like the fuel prices were starting to go back down. And so here is heavy water, for instance, reaching a 1-year high point at 125 and is pulling back a little bit below 100 isk now for the sellers, 88 for the buyers. So this could be like a fallout of the war, right? Because you do need like fuel types for bigger ships, and then also industry, the industry changes themselves, of course. So heavy water is basically going back down in a more normal trading channel between 75 and 100 isk. Then the isotopes were all very high, but we are seeing a little bit of a pullback for helium isotopes. Sellers at 1100, buyers still above 1000 isk though, so this may be some very strong support, but be careful. If we break that, we could again maybe have like that. Here is a shoulder, here's the head, here's another shoulder. Then who knows, we could be back in the 750 range. Hydrogen isotopes already back below the 1250. So that is not good news. 1100 for the first seller, 1150 for most. Still above 1000 for the buyers, but Will they remain in the market? Hard to say. Liquid ozone also stopping its ascent, basically very violent ascent when the changes to industry hit, apparently second half of April. We are currently talking, well, down to 444 for the sellers, 400 ISK for the buyers. I mean, it's still a massive premium compared to a year ago, but clearly we're not continuing to go up in price. Nitrogen isotope, same thing, very nice late bubble you could say, and then we're still above 1,000, but 1150 suppliers coming in with millions of units, and buyers are just above 1100 ISK. Oxygen isotopes, very nice top that's being formed here, very steady increase to 1750. We're currently selling at 1500 and 1450 for the buyer. So this is definitely part of what's keeping those fuel prices from going completely crazy. And then we get strontium as also kind of expensive and trying to defend 6000 ISK, but the buyers are already quite below that. Any supply can push us back down in a 5000 ISK range pretty easily. In my opinion, I'm gonna add the fuels just because I'm sort of interested in seeing how that has translated. So we get the fuel blocks. Let's take a quick look at these. Yeah, they're also topping off. I mean, this one, helium fuel blocks, went to almost 30,000 ISK, pretty much double. It's a little bit less than that, but definitely close to doubling the price of a year ago. But now we're back down to 25,000 for helium fuel blocks. Hydrogen, same thing, peak up to 30, but we are starting to normalize a little bit. And then we get nitrogen fuel blocks, just going straight down to less than 25k. Yeah, 25 for the sellers, but buyers are already below 24,000 ISK. And then oxygen fuel blocks going down very quickly as well, not even bothering with trying to create a second shoulder or anything like that. 27,000 for the sellers, 24,000 for the buyers. Its peak was up to 35k though, so let's keep that in mind. Definitely a more volatile last month or so for oxygen fuel blocks, but things are coming back down decently quickly in the ice products and the fuel blocks market, it seems, which for people that still run structures is of course good news, but yeah, looks like mine won't be too long for this world. Anyways, that's it for this EVE Talk, guys. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.